Chapter 11 of the Defiant Agents. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. The Defiant Agents by Andre Norton. Chapter 11. Either the Red was lucky or his reactions were quick. He had somehow rolled clear of the struggling horse as Loopy leaped from behind a boulder, knife out and ready. To the eyes of the Apaches, the helmeted man lay easy prey to Loopy's attack, nor did he raise an arm to defend himself, though one hand lay free across the plate on his chest. But the young Apache stumbled, rebounded back as if he had run into an unseen wall, when his knife was still 6 inches away from the other. Loopy cried out, stood under a second impact as the Red fired an automatic with his other hand. Travis dropped his bow, returned to the most primitive weapon of all. His hand closed around a stone, and he hurled a fist-sized oval straight at the helmet, so clearly outlined against the rocks below. But even as Loopy's knife had never touched flesh, so was the rock deflected. The Red was covered by some protective field. This was certainly nothing the Apaches had seen before. Nolan's whistle summoned them to draw back. The Red fired again, the sharp bark of the handgun harsh and loud. He did not have any real target, for with the exception of Loopy, the Apaches had gone to earth. Between the rocks, the Red was struggling to his feet, but he moved slowly, favoring his side and one leg. He had not come totally unharmed from his tumble with the pony. An armed enemy who could not be touched, one who knew there were more than outlaws in this region. The Red leader was far more of a threat to the Apaches now than he had ever been. He must not be allowed to escape. He was holstering his gun, moving along with one hand against the rocks to steady himself, trying to reach one of the ponies that stood with trailing reins beside the inert Totters. But when the enemy reached the far side of that rock, he would have to sacrifice either his steadying hold or his touch on the chest plate where his other hand rested. Would he then, for an instant, be vulnerable? The pony. Travis put an arrow on bow cord and shot. Not at the Red, who had released his hold of the rock, preferring to totter instead of lose control of the chest plate, but into the air straight before the nose of the mount. The pony neighed wildly, tried to turn, and his shoulder caught the free, groping hand of the Red and spun the man around and back, so that he flung up both hands in an effort to ward himself off the rocks. Then the pony stampeded down the break, its companions catching the same fever, trailing in a mad dash which kept the Red hard against the boulder. He continued to stand there until the horses, save for the wounded one, still kicking fruitlessly, were gone. Travis felt a sense of reprieve. They might not be able to get at the Red, but he was hurt and afoot. 2 strikes which might yet reduce him to a condition the Apaches could handle. Apparently the other was also aware of that, for now he pushed out from the rocks and stumbled along after the ponies. But he went only a step or two, then settled down once more against a convenient boulder. He began to work at the plate on his chest. Nolan appeared noiselessly beside Travis. What does he do? His lips were very close to the younger man's ear, his voice hardly more than a breath. Travis shook his head slightly. The Red's actions were a complete mystery. Unless now disabled and afoot, he was trying to summon aid, though there was no landing place for a helicopter here. Now was the time to try and reach Loopy. Travis had seen a slight movement in the falling Apache's hand, the first indication that the enemy's shot had not been as fatal as it had looked. He touched Nolan's arm, pointed to Lupe, and then, discarding his bow and quiver beside the war leader, he stripped for action. There was cover down to the wounded Apache, which would aid him. He must pass one of the Tartars on the way, but none of the tribesmen had shown any signs of life since they had fallen from their saddles at the first attack. With infinite care, Travis lowered himself into a narrow passage, took a lizard's way between brush and boulder, pausing only when he reached the Tartar for a quick check of the potential enemy. The lean brown face was half turned, one cheek in the sand, but the slack mouth, the closed eyes were those Travis believed of a dead man. By some action of his diabolic machine, the Red must have stuffed out his four captors, perhaps in the belief that they were part of the Apache attack. Travis reached the rock where Lupe lay. He knew that Nolan was watching the Red and would give him warning if he suddenly showed an interest in anything but his machine. The Apache reached out, his hands closing on Lupe's ankles. Beneath his touch, flesh and muscle tensed. Lupe's eyes were open, focused now on Travis. There was a bleeding furrow above his right ear. The Red had tried a difficult head shot, failing in his aim by a mere fraction of an inch. Lupe made a swift move for which Travis was ready. His grip on the other's body helped to tumble them both around a rock which lay between them and the Red. There was the crack of another shot and dust spurted from the side of the boulder, but they lay together, safe for the present, as Travis was sure the enemy would not risk an open attack on their small fortress. With Travis's aid, Lupe struggled back up to the site where Nolan waited. Jill Lee was there to make competent examination of the boy's wound. "Creased," he reported. "A sore head, but no great damage. Perhaps a scar later, warrior." He gave Lupe an encouraging thump on the shoulder before plastering an aid pack over the cut. "Now we go," Nolan spoke with emphatic decision. "He saw enough of us to know we are not Tartars." Nolan's eyes were cold, his mouth grim as he faced Travis. "And now can we fight him?" "There is a wall you cannot see, about him," Lupe broke in. "When I would strike at him, I could not." "A man with invisible protection and a gun." Jill Lee took up the argument. "How would you deal with him, younger brother?" "I don't know," Travis admitted. Yet he also believed that if they withdrew, left the Red here to be found by his own people, the enemy would immediately begin an investigation of the southern country. Perhaps pushed by their need for learning more about the Apaches, they would bring the helicopter in over the mountains. The answer to all Apache dangers, for now, lay in the immediate future of this one man. He is hurt. He cannot go far on foot. And even if he calls the chopper, there is no landing place. He will have to move elsewhere to be picked up. Travis thought aloud, citing the thin handful of points in their favor. Taché nodded toward the rim of the ravine. "Rocks up there, and rocks can roll. Start an earthslide." Something within Travis balked at that. From the first he had been willing enough to slug it out with the Red, weapon to weapon, man to man. Also he had wanted to take a captive, not stand over a body. But to use the nature of the country against the enemy, that was the oldest Apache trick of all, and one they would have to be forced to employ. Nolan had already nodded in assent, and Taché and Jill Lee started off. Even if the Red did possess a protective wall device, could it operate in full against a landslide? They all doubted that. The Apaches reached the cliff rim without exposing themselves to the enemy's fire. The Red still sat there calmly, his back against the rock, his hands busy with his equipment as if he had all the time in the world. Then suddenly came a scream from more than one throat. "Dar you gar!" The ancient war cry of the Mongol horde.